Hello, 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 welcome back. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. First thing I just want to drop in here. Last night, Saturday night, evening, shall I say, the movies that were on. The movies that were on. I didn't watch them. I recorded The Remnant because I haven't seen that film for years, and that's such a good film. I can watch that at a time where it's more comfortable when there's nothing else to watch. But I just had to take note of the films that were on because as it just falls into exactly what I've been saying these last few months. So, last night, Demolition Man was on. We know everything Demolition brings out. Super technology. Um, the personalities have changed. People are all kind of have a hive mind. They're all obsessed with like not touching each other, which is kind of separating people. Uh, they had to bring back the old style criminal because they had to bring back the old style cop to catch the old style criminal. But the old style criminal was bought by the elites. Two different worlds. Those living above ground, those who take the mark, and those that live in underground. The toilet paper issue, where he swears into the machine to get the toilet paper. What else? I'm sure I've missed a few points, but next one, Independence Day. The whole aliens thing. And you see how NASA is all these missions to space and billionaires going to space. I guarantee something's coming up soon where somebody's going to say, oh, we spotted something. There's a ship out there, blah, blah, blah. It's coming. It's coming. It's coming. Because that's going to be the next thing to try and explain away, to try and cover up the book of Revelations. Just as they use climate change to cover up the Most High's warnings, the Most High's power. White House down. Now this one's obvious. Say obvious. Infiltration. Domestic terrorists. Treasonous traitors. And I'm sure, give it a couple of weeks, then it'll be Olympus has fallen, London has fallen, Angel has fallen. Once again, which they just showed a couple of months before. Transformers. Transformers. Fallen angels. Okay? And Blade Runner 2024. Future tech. Digital girlfriends. Virtual girlfriends. Desolate lands. Flying cars. All in one night. All these 5 films from one channel on this channel, on that channel, on this channel, on that channel. Are they not trying to tell us something? Are they not trying to funnel our mind somewhere? I just wanted to drop that in there. So let's carry on from yesterday. Survivors, chapter 1 we did yesterday. And are you sitting comfortably? Sip of the green tea. The key is with green teas and herbal teas and white teas, you never just pour boiling hot water onto them. Just put a dash of cold water, then put the hot water in, because you're burning the leaves, you're burning the goodness. scorching the goodness out of the leaves. Anyway, totally off subject. Sorry. So, no need for a recap. Chapter 2, Foretold. The control towers were in chaos, both at Gatwick and at Heathrow. In fact, all over Europe, as they tried to deal with so many returning flights. On his headphones in the cockpit of the big 747, Rayford Strait had been able to pick up something about a charter flight missing off the coast of Scotland. It had run out of fuel while trying to get back to England. There was no telling what had become of many flights which would not have had enough fuel to get back to Europe. They would have been forced to put down somewhere in North America, with or without airport runways. There must have been dozens and dozens of crashes. Rayford had landed and walked into the airport. He started to get a clearer picture of the enormity of the problem. Amidst the pandemonium of flight cancellations and unscheduled arrivals, the airport was abuzz with talk about huge preemptive military strike against the United States by Russia. It was 2 p.m. in London, but only 8 p.m. in Chicago. The sun had not even come up on the west coast of America yet, and it would be a few hours before any video coverage would be available. But every news station in the world was interrupted its normal programming to give sketchy reports of the disaster. Early estimates put the deaths at 5 million. Later reports would verify the loss in human life was already several times that figure, and it would almost double over the next few weeks. Damaged cities, highways and airports meant that reconstruction was out of the question. Even if there had been no nuclear fallout to worry about, the entire country was without government, without power, without communication, and without vital transport links. The central business district of nearly 100 major American cities had been entirely wiped out. If the attack had not come in the middle of the night, the loss in human lives would have been several times higher. Hospitals and inner cities had been destroyed, and along with them had gone the entire on-duty medical staffs. What medical and rescue services were still available had to function almost without administration, and that was assuming that the rescue personnel themselves were still alive and able to work. America was suddenly back in the Middle Ages. Everyone was being forced to fend for themselves and survive. Emergency service throughout the English-speaking world were quick to start marshalling forces to airlift rescue supplies, protective clothing and medical personnel to America, Mexico and Canada. The wounded would need to be treated as quickly as possible, although for many hundreds of thousands, even treatment would not save them. Those who were already dead would most likely be left where they were. There were mixed feelings from the non-English speaking world. Everyone was of course shocked, but US President Gerald Fitzhugh had made many enemies with his growing military involvement in world affairs. Not just that president, like presidents and presidents and presidents, just the whole of America and European countries who have followed them. The atrocities are just too much. With his growing military involvement in world affairs, he had conducted numerous wars of liberation, supposedly aimed at wiping out terrorism. His closest aides swore that he genuinely believed he was doing God's will. Western arrogance. They said that he experienced personal pain at the civilian casualties that he had caused. but that he felt it was necessary in order to create a kind of holy world peace. Zhu Jiangtao from Tibet had been elected Secretary General of the United Nations 1 year earlier, 2 years after Tibet had been admitted to the world body, and 3 years after the UN headquarters had been shifted to Geneva. Although Deng Xiao's policies were widely popular with Russia and with the Third World, his hands had been tied because of America's veto power in the UN Security Council. Deng Xiao wanted to ease the Third World debt and to do away with prejudicial import-export duties, which had the effect of favouring rich nations and further crippling the poorer ones. America's weak justification for opposing the scheme was just that Deng Xiao was trying to do too much too soon. Russia and China, who strongly backed Deng Xiao, were as stubborn as America about vetoing American proposals for military intervention in countries where the US believed human rights were being abused. But the US had always had ways of working around veto from either Russia or China. It used its wealth and military might to form military alliance with which it would wage wars on its own. Ain't that the truth? Sadly, President Fitzhugh found that the more he played God with the future of other countries he saw as being evil, the easier it had become to justify the interference, even when atrocities committed by the side he was helping were worse than those by the ones he was committing America to destroy. That's so relevant right now. That's so relevant. Sadly, President Fitzhugh found that the more he played God with the future of countries he saw as being evil, the easier it had become to justify interference, even when the atrocities committed by the side he was helping were worse than those by the ones he was committing America to destroy. That's super relevant. 2002. Of course, the American public had lapped it up. The important thing politically was that Fitzhugh had not lost a single skirmish while he had been in office, as long as he was careful to target small revolutionary movements and relatively weak countries, and then hit them hard. He was almost guaranteed success. Troops would no sooner return triumphant from one conflict than he would be sending out more to settle another. Literally just come out of Afghanistan. And now where they're going. Americans were more proud than ever to be Americans. They truly saw themselves as the saviors of the world. And President Fitzhugh, with his claim to being born again, never missed an opportunity to remind voters that God was on his side. But now, with America in the throes of death, Russia, China, and their hero Deng Xiao had nothing to fear, either from Fitzhugh or from Britain or France. The other two permanent members of the Security Council, France had been distancing itself from the US anyway. It appeared that all three of the dissenting nations had been subdued in the space of just a few hours. You see, once America goes down, there'll be no more of this, we stand with Israel, we stand with Ukraine, we do this, we're going to go and do this. No more. Britain, France, the usual suspects, they're all going to stand down. They're all going to stand down. Rayford was told to get some sleep, but to stay in touch with the airport so that he could be called in if his plane was needed for a mercy mission. All commercial flights to the US had been cancelled. The British government had already declared a state of emergency. This meant that the British military would take command of all local airlines and all local airline pilots. Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and many European nations were making similar moves to assist. Supplies urgently needed to be flown to North America and refugees needed to be flown out. The entire population of the US was about to be evacuated, at least what remained of it. There had been no reports of damage in Canada, apart from a couple of hits of unpopulated regions, and these were apparently caused by defective missiles. It seems that Russia's war had begun only with the US, not with Canada. England, Australia, and other countries that were sympathetic with America had also escaped without a hint of attack. So airports in Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, Quebec, and Vancouver were being geared up for around-the-clock arrivals and departures. Rayford, along with all other available pilots, would be playing an important part in the rescue operation. Although he was tired from the trip, there was too much happening for Rayford to sleep straight away. He checked out of the airport, then laid on the bed fully clothed. He checked into the airport, then laid on the bed fully clothed. He stared at the ceiling in the same state of shock that so much of the world was in at that very moment. He thought about Irene, Chloe, and about Raimi. His concerns turned only briefly to the other relatives in the US who may have been hit. Telephone communication with the US was virtually impossible because so many lines had been knocked out. Even satellite phones were being affected by the fallout. Fortunately, Rayford had brought Irene a microwave sat phone so that he could call her from the cockpit when passing through the relatively narrow band on the Pancon route from London to Chicago. That would now be his main link with her. He would probably be able to give her another call on his flight back to Canada. Images of how it must have been for the millions who had already died haunted Rayford. His thoughts returned to Irene and the kids down in the basement. There was comfort in knowing that they, at least, were still alive. With any luck, he would be talking with them within 24 hours. He silently thanked God. So the daughter was just like her father, a skeptic, a realist. Now in these hard times, what they can't believe was happening. She prayed when she was trying to light the candles. And now he's thanking God that his family is safe in the basement. In time, he hoped to be able to find a way to get to rescuers to the house so that he could take his family to safety. Late that afternoon, after a few hours of fitful sleep, Rayford awoke, showered, then left word at the hotel desk that he was taking a cab to the airport. He figured airline officials could tell him more about what was happening, and he would be able to learn from any other news source. A visit to the airline offices above the departure lounge revealed that Rayford had been assigned to fly out at 6 the next morning on a flight to Toronto. There would only be a few passengers, mostly doctors and nurses, but the plane would also carry tents, medical supplies, food, and radiation-proof clothing. They were already being loaded in a special hangar at the south end of the airport. Rayford further learned that Rayford further learned that when word had begun to spread, only hours after the bombing had stopped, that Canada had not been hit. This had started a mass northern exodus from the US states. The northern highways were already packed with people fleeing the scene. Canadian authorities were frantically trying to set up refugee camps to contain them. Fortunately, it was nearly summer. Family, you know about that, yeah? Fortunately, it was nearly summer. So thousands of the people were quickly accommodated outside. Near Canada's border with the US, this left churches and schools and auditoriums free to be turned into hospitals for the wounded. Helicopters and land rescue vehicles started almost immediately to ferry the wounded out of the northern states, but even then, they were only able to service a few of the worst hit cities. Vancouver was caring for the wounded from Seattle, Portland, and Spokane. Toronto was taking survivors from Detroit, Cleveland, and Buffalo, and Ottawa, Montreal, and Quebec were doing what they could to help refugees from the area that included Boston, Rochester, Philadelphia, and New York City. At the same time, Canadians themselves were panicking about the fallout that was headed their way. Airports in all of the major cities were packed with passengers waiting for standby seats out of the country. Hundreds of flights which would have normally been destined for the US were quickly rerouted to Canada, where airlines could be guaranteed to fill every seat regardless of what they were charged or where the destination was to be. Officials from Emergency Preparedness Canada were frantically trying to set up priority criteria for determining who should be allowed to take the first flights out of the country. Understandable, yeah. Key workers, and not just people with money trying to pay their way onto the first flights, which probably would happen anyway. It's like that film Songbird, like it's just unbelievable, like the cheek of these films, like they're literally showing you with the yellow armbands, and it shows you that the rich were actually trading in these armbands. And you saw very, very similar things happened during those lockdowns. Celebrities and politicians, they were just sort of walking around willy-nilly, going here, going there. Meanwhile, we're locked down. A TV show in the a TV in the Heathrow Airport VIP lounge updated viewers on how many US cities and airports had been demolished. Aircraft were still able to come and go from some smaller airstrips, but that would not be enough to meet the far more urgent needs of the larger cities. Cities like Chicago, which were the ones that had suffered the greatest losses, Milwaukee, St. Paul, Minneapolis, both closer to Canada than Chicago, were on their own in providing transport to the refugee camps being set up by their northern neighbours. President Gerald Fitzhugh and his family were believed to be trapped beneath the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., where they had been rushed to shelter as soon as the alert went up. If a bomb had landed close enough to bring down the White House, which appeared to be the case, then escape for those beneath, it would not be easy. People who had survived the bombing were being told via radio broadcast to seek shelter and to await further instructions. there would be attempts to relocate them to places away from the fallout. But first, the authorities needed to establish exactly where that might be. Weather reports before the attack showed a cold front moving southeast across the Midwest. The fallout cloud would therefore be likely to move in that direction. However, this was only good news for those people on the American West Coast, because for every cloud moving away from the other localities, there was another coming toward them from the west. With nuclear strikes in San Diego, Anaheim, LA, Fresno, Sacramento, Oakland, San Francisco, Portland, Eugene, Tacoma, Seattle, and Spokane, states on the West Coast were almost the most likely hit anyway. The only area between Boston and Washington had been more heavily hit. Only the area between Boston and Washington had been more heavily hit. Rayford could see from the first film footage of refugees heading to Canada that he and his family would not have much chance of reunion through that route. Both sides of the freeways were being used for northbound traffic, which was at a standstill in places and only creeping along in others. Traffic had to detour around major cities and other badly damaged roads. Against such a flow of traffic, only emergency vehicles had any hope of travelling south. The freeways themselves were becoming increasingly blocked by vehicles without fuel, which had to be pushed to the side of the road and deserted. That left the drivers and passengers of those vehicles to venture forward on foot. Days out on the road would mean days more exposed to the deadly fallout. Civil defense warned against trying to escape before it could be established that there was some place safe to go, but millions took no heed. Chicago was too far away from Toronto to attract Toronto's limited rescue resources, but some local authorities in the Chicago area were commandeering aircrafts, vehicles, even ships to ferry survivors north. Everyone working on rescue operations were putting themselves at risk, and protective clothing was urgently required. Rayford took some consolation in knowing that, even if he could not get to his own family, he would be helping the overall rescue effort. In time, his involvement might give him the opening that he needed to help Irene and the kids as well. At about 7 p.m, Rayford left the VIP lounge and headed for the cab rank. He had learned as much as he could, and now it was time to get a few more hours of sleep before his departure. On the way out of the airport lobby, he was approached by a slim blonde man in his 30s. The shabbily dressed man stuck a booklet in Rayford's face and asked in a broad German accent if he wanted to read it. The Fallout of America was the title. It appeared above a picture of an upside down American flag. Rayford pushed the man aside in disgust. Always someone ready to cash in on the sufferings of others, he thought to himself. But just as he walked out the door of the airport, it hit him. The attack had only just taken place a few hours ago. How could someone in England already have produced a booklet telling about it? He raced back to the airport, his eyes searching in every direction for the man. The little German was near the Pancon ticket counter, talking to 2 or 3 other people who also appeared to be sending him away. "Where did you get that? Who wrote it?" Rayford whispered, almost at the level of a shout. When he had caught the man's attention by grabbing his arm, he was trying hard not to create a scene, and yet he was desperate to know what was going on. Some friends together, we wrote it. This is how it's written, yeah. Like, so I'm gonna have to just try and butcher a German accent here. This is how it's written. Like, it literally says, "We wrote it." Some friends wrote, some friends together, we wrote it. The man replied, half in fear. "You're interested?" he asked. "Yes, I'm very interested," said Rayford emphatically. "Very interested. But first, tell me how you knew it was going to happen." "We study the Bible prophecy," said softly spoken little man. "And we pray. We have been saying this, that this would happen. We have been saying it for years now. It is most Im- it is most imperative that you read this book." His brow was wrinkled in an almost exaggerated show of seriousness. But then, how could anyone possibly exaggerate the seriousness of what just happened in America? The young German went on dramatically. "Other things are coming too. Very serious things." Rayford, Rayford wanted to read the book, but he also wanted some instant answers. He offered the man. Reinhard was his name. A meal if he he offered the man, Reinhard was his name, a meal if he would sit down and talk to him. "It is most important that I get these books to the people," replied Reinhard. "We can talk later." "Please," Rayford begged, almost in tears now. "I'll be flying to Canada tonight. My family is over there. I must know what is going on before I leave." Reinhard sensed an urgency in Rayford's voice that he must not have found in his other clients. But he quickly backed down. "Where do you want to talk?" he asked. Rayford took him to a table in the nearest restaurant, ordered them both a meal, and then opened the floor for Reinhard to explain what was going on. "What is happening now? It is judgment from God and on America. But it is also opening for Russia to control the United Nations. Deng Zhao is Russia's man. You understand?" Rayford knew of the growing unrest throughout the world and many countries, and what many countries considered was America's abuse of power within the UN. That much of Reinhard's explanation made sense, but it was not what he was looking for. "Are you telling me that you knew this was going to happen just from reading the Bible?" he asked, incredulously. "I cannot show you all that you wish to know in such short time. You will read it in the book." Sorry, Germans. Like, I'm sorry, but like, it's tough to read because it's the way it's written and it's a poor German accent. But I kind of, I'm sorry. In this clipped German manner, in his clipped German manner, Reinhard's promise sounded more like a command. "You will see for yourself. For now, we have little time. I must move quickly. The Bible tells of 5 world powers. They are a bear, an eagle, a lion, a leopard, and a rooster. These are signs for Russia, America, England, Africa, and France." He counted them off on his fingers. "You must know the leopard is being now used as a sign of solidarity for the third world." You see the struggles going on with France in the continent right now. Like, it's all being hashed out. You know? Big up President Traore, you get me? Rayford was finding it difficult to follow, but he decided to let Reinhard carry on. Hey, pray for President Traore, yeah? Yeah, family, pray for him. Rayford was finding it difficult to follow, but he decided to let Reinhard carry on. England, France, and America can veto plans by Russia and China in the United Nations. The other 10 Security Council members, they are called rotating members. They come from the other countries. So, Rayford said, who was showing only mild interest at this stage. He had other questions that he wanted to ask, but he would wait a bit longer. Reinhard went on. The eagle's wings are being plucked. You will see it in the book. It is in the Bible. This bombing, it is the plucking of the eagle's wings. After falls the eagle, the lion, that is England, loses its power. The rooster's wings, they join with the leopard. That is France and all of Europe joining with the third world. You see, it is because the bear Russia subdues, that is to say, he stops three world powers from fighting against her. She does it by plucking the wings of the eagle. With help from the other 10 nations, the new leader will control the world. Rayford was losing patience. I'm not interested in all the political stuff, he said. Do you have any answers? My family is over there. If you really know what is going on, what can I do for them? What should I do? It is God's punishment, Reinhard said soberly. If your people are alive, they will be forced to leave. No one will live there ever again. God is angry with the church people of America. The church people, Rayford said with genuine surprise. Why the church people? He was thinking of Irene. They fight the teachings of Jesus. They do not prepare for what is coming. And they do not tell the truth to others. My wife is a church person, Rayford responded indignantly. She was always talking about this. Something called the Great Tribulation. No, this is not Great Tribulation. Not yet, said Reinhard. This is only the start of what is coming. Excuse me, sorry. But your wife, she needs faith that is strong enough to go through the Great Tribulation. I do not think she will find it though, through the churches. She does not need to go through it, at least not the way she tells it, Rayford replied. He was surprised to hear himself defending something he always scoffed at. She says that she will be taken to heaven before it happens. And did she tell you that America was going to be punished before she goes to heaven? Reynard asked quietly. As he stared at his lap. When Rayford did not answer immediately, Reinhard raised his head and then his blonde eyebrows in further anticipation. Rayford finally spoke. Well, I don't know. I don't recall her saying anything about that. Even as he spoke, he was thinking about how emotional Irene had been on the phone. Maybe she missed that part. You see, with America, with all their mega churches like that, they can't see that they are Babylon, that they will get destroyed. They just can't see it. There's very few small pockets of small churches who are trying to sound the alarm. But the arrogance, the American arrogance, it's just unbelievable. She will need help, spiritual help, Reinhard said sympathetically. He went on slowly as though talking to himself. It is so very hard for the church people. They cannot say when they are wrong. Then he looked Rayford directly in his eyes and spoke slowly and deliberately, his own eyes opening wide as he spoke. You must not let her run away. She will want to run off and find her Jesus. Rayford did not like hearing his wife talked about in such a way at a time when he was so close to losing her. He would take the time to study Reinhard's book more closely later, but he was not getting any information from his strange little man that would help him in his present situation. So he exhausted himself and left Reinhard to finish his meal alone. Rayford wondered, as he glanced back at the skinny little street preacher wolfing the last of his food down, just how long had it been since Reinhard's last meal? End of chapter. Writer's notes. Predictions about the fall of America are mostly based on Daniel 7, 1-7, and Revelations 13, 1 and 2. Daniel's prophecy is usually assumed to be about the original Babylon Empire, which I've heard before talking to people on the streets, especially JWs, Jehovah's Witnesses, talking about it. It's like, who is Babylon? And they're like, oh. Daniel's prophecy is usually assumed to be about the original Babylon Empire, represented by a lion with eagle's wings, which you can see if you're paying attention. You see these signs dotted around your countries. Clerkenwell Bridge, lion with eagle's wings. The Persian Empire represented by a bear. The Greek Empire represented by a leopard with 4 chicken wings. And the Roman Empire represented by a horrible beast that devours the whole earth. And yet the same symbols apply to 4 of the 5 members of the UN Security Council. The symbol of the 5th member, China, is a dragon. Only the leopard or panther is not a prominent national symbol today, except as a symbol for Africa, militant blacks, or perhaps the third world. In Revelation 13:2, a future world power is described, which has the attributes of all the animals listed in Daniel 7, except the eagle. The eagle apparently no longer exists at the time. There are 10 rotating members of the UN Security Council, taken from the rest of the world. The Bible says that with the help of 10 kings, a resurrected world power will destroy another world power, described as a prostitute, who rules over the world trade. Revelation 17, 1-5 and 12-16, and her name is Babylon. The Encyclopedia Britannica lists only one city in the modern world which is named Babylon. It is located on Long Island in New York City. not far from the New York Stock Exchange. So that's going to trigger a lot of people who prophecy and everything. But like I said, like I've only been doing this 4 years, so I leave that to the elders. By now, you know the channels which to go to, and it's begun. This has begun. I was going to read the Daniel and the Revelations, but I suggest you go and do it yourselves.